In March 2015, construction workers repairing a drainage pipe beneath a busy street in Hereford, England, struck something that stopped their machinery cold. What they assumed was bedrock turned out to be a massive stone slab, deliberately placed, expertly carved, hiding something that had waited 6 centuries to be found. When archaeologists lifted that stone, they discovered a skeleton arranged with ceremonial precision. Hands crossed over chest, head facing east, surrounded by fragments of silk and iron. The bones told a story written in fractures and scars, a life of sanctioned violence, honor, and secrets kept even in death. This was no ordinary burial. This was a knight who'd fought in the 100 Years' War, bled in tournaments for glory and gold, then vanished from all records. DNA technology would finally reveal his bloodline, but the mystery of why he was buried beneath what became a city street leads us into the shadowy world of medieval power, where warriors lived by codes we barely understand today. The morning of March 12, 2015, began as routine maintenance work in Hereford's oldest district. The city council had approved sewer line replacement beneath Broad Street, a narrow road that traced paths walked since Roman times. Construction foreman Michael Davies expected Victorian-era pipes, maybe some Georgian building foundations. What he didn't expect was for his excavator to hit resistance at just 5 feet down. The machine's hydraulic arm shuddered and stopped. Davies climbed into the trench, assuming they'd struck concrete or abandoned utility. Instead, his flashlight illuminated dressed stone, massive limestone blocks fitted together with medieval precision. The blocks formed a rectangular outline, approximately 8 feet long and 3 feet wide. This wasn't random rubble, but deliberate construction, impossibly old for its location beneath a street supposedly dating only to the 18th century. Protocol required halting work immediately. By afternoon, Dr. Catherine Williams from the University of Worcester arrived with her archaeological team. Williams specialized in medieval burial practices, and one glance confirmed her suspicions. This is a high-status burial, probably 13th or 14th century, based on masonry techniques. Nobody got buried like this unless they mattered. The excavation transformed from construction to archaeological investigation. Williams's team spent 3 days exposing the burial chamber. The limestone slabs formed a stone coffin, a cist burial reserved for nobility and clergy in medieval England. The positioning beneath Broad Street initially puzzled investigators, until archival research revealed the crucial detail. This area had once formed the southern boundary of Hereford Cathedral's monastic precinct. The street had been built much later, literally paving over forgotten holy ground. On March 15th, with local historians watching, the team prepared to lift the uppermost slab. The cover stone alone weighed nearly 400 pounds, requiring specialized equipment. As it rose, Williams photographed every stage. When the slab finally cleared the opening, revealing the interior for the first time in centuries, several observers audibly gasped. The skeleton lay in perfect anatomical position, undisturbed since initial burial. The individual had been laid facing east, traditional Christian orientation toward Jerusalem and the rising sun symbolizing resurrection. Both arms crossed over the chest, hands positioned precisely at the sternum. The posture communicated peaceful rest, but the bones themselves told a different story. Even to untrained eyes, this skeleton appeared unusual. The long bones showed exceptional thickness and density. Muscle attachment points were pronounced, indicating a lifetime of extraordinary physical activity. The skull sat slightly elevated on remnants of what had been a wooden pillow, now decomposed to dark stains. And everywhere, covering nearly every major bone, were marks. Scores of healed fractures, cuts, and trauma patterns that spoke to a life of relentless combat. Williams documented each feature methodically, but her mind raced. The burial's location, just outside the cathedral proper, suggested someone important, but perhaps controversial. Important enough for stone interment, but not quite worthy of burial within the cathedral itself. The elaborate stone construction indicated resources and status. The bodily evidence indicated a warrior. Together, these clues pointed toward a specific social category: a knight, and a highly active one. Surrounding the skeleton, the team found fragments hinting at burial goods. Tiny iron flakes suggested metal objects had once been interred, but corroded away. Traces of organic material, analyzed later as silk, indicated expensive textiles. Most intriguingly, chemical analysis revealed oak presence, the high-quality oak used for coffins of the wealthy. This wasn't a shroud burial or simple earth grave. Someone had constructed a proper wooden coffin, placed it within a stone chamber, and sealed it with engineering meant to last forever. Identifying the knight required detective work combining archaeology, archival research, and heraldic analysis. Dr. Williams's team began with the burial's location and time period, cross-referencing cathedral records with medieval property documents. The breakthrough came from an obscure manuscript in Hereford Cathedral's archives, a 14th-century list of benefactors entitled to burial in the cathedral precinct. Among the names appeared Sir William de Erghum, a knight who'd served Edward III during the 100 Years' War. The entry noted he'd been granted burial rights in the cathedral grounds in recognition of service to the crown and substantial donations to the cathedral's building fund. More significantly, it specified burial in the southern section, exactly where the skeleton had been found. The de Erghum family represented England's military middle class, not great nobles, but professional warriors who'd risen through combat prowess and royal favor. William's grandfather had been a minor landowner in Yorkshire. His father had fought in the Scottish Wars, earning modest lands as reward. William himself had entered this martial tradition as a young boy, following a path that would transform him from farmer's grandson to decorated warrior. Medieval knighthood training began early. At age 7, William would have been sent to another noble household as a page, learning basic horsemanship, weapons handling, and courtly manners. The training was rigorous and often brutal. Boys learned to endure pain without complaint, to obey without question, and to fight without hesitation. They practiced with wooden swords that could break bones, rode horses that could kill careless riders, and competed in contests where serious injury was common. At 14, successful pages became squires, personal servants to knights who would teach them advanced combat techniques. A squire's duties were demanding, maintaining his knight's armor and weapons, caring for his war horses, assisting him in dressing for battle, and fighting alongside him when needed. In return, the squire received intensive training in mounted combat, swordsmanship, lance work, and the complex code of chivalric behavior. William de Erghum received his knighthood around 1340, at approximately 20 years old, probably on a battlefield during one of Edward III's early campaigns. The ceremony would have been simple: a tap on the shoulder with a sword, words binding him to chivalric duties, and immediate assignment to combat duty. He was now Sir William, entitled to wear spurs, bear a coat of arms, and command men in battle. His coat of arms, documented in heraldic rolls, featured a blue shield with 3 silver chevrons, a design suggesting his family had distinguished itself in service to the crown. The chevron was an honorable ordinary in heraldry, often granted to those who'd protected important positions or persons. His rise through military ranks came through combat skill and strategic positioning. The 100 Years' War created unprecedented opportunities for ambitious knights. Successful warriors could capture enemy nobles and ransom them for enormous sums. They could earn royal grants of land confiscated from enemies. They could accumulate wealth and status impossible in peacetime. But this advancement came at terrible cost. Medieval warfare was brutally physical. Knights fought in armor weighing 60 pounds or more, swinging weapons that required enormous strength, enduring hours of combat in scorching heat or freezing cold. They faced arrows, crossbow bolts, pole arms, and other knights equally desperate. The skeleton found beneath Hereford Street bore witness to this violence, a body that had absorbed incredible punishment and somehow continued fighting. The analysis of Sir William's skeleton revealed the physical toll of a warrior's life with startling clarity. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the forensic anthropologist examining the remains, catalogued injuries that painted a vivid picture of medieval combat's reality. The left collarbone showed a classic cavalry injury, a break consistent with being violently unhorsed. The fracture had healed slightly offset, suggesting it had been set by someone with medical knowledge, but without modern techniques. The healing pattern indicated he'd returned to combat while still recovering. Both lower legs bore healed fractures to the fibula. These injuries matched patterns seen in jousting accidents, where a lance strike could snap the bone even through armor. The breaks had healed cleanly, but showed bone enlargement at fracture sites. Multiple such injuries suggested years of tournament participation. 7 ribs showed healed fractures scattered across both sides. Rib breaks in medieval combat typically resulted from blunt force, being struck by maces, falling from horses, or being crushed in melees. These injuries would have made breathing agonizing during healing, yet there was no evidence he'd stopped fighting during recovery. His spine revealed perhaps the most telling evidence. Multiple vertebrae showed degenerative changes associated with carrying heavy loads over decades. A full suit of mail could weigh 40 to 60 pounds. Later plate armor, even more. Wearing such equipment regularly from young adulthood through middle age created distinctive skeletal changes. The pelvis and leg bones showed modifications indicating extensive horseback riding. The hip sockets showed slight erosion and remodeling. The femurs curved slightly inward, a pattern seen in people who spent most of their lives on horseback. Medieval knights trained for mounted combat from childhood, and this skeleton bore every mark of that training. His diet left its own traces. Isotopic analysis revealed consistent animal protein consumption throughout his life. Beef, pork, mutton, in quantities far exceeding what ordinary people accessed. His bones also showed regular marine fish consumption, despite Hereford being nearly 100 miles from the ocean. Expensive, preserved fish that only wealthy households could afford. More surprisingly, trace element analysis revealed sugar consumption. Medieval England imported sugar from Mediterranean sources at enormous expense. Only the very wealthy consumed it regularly. Neck signatures in his teeth showed consistent sugar exposure, probably from sweetened wine and elaborate desserts served at noble feasts. His teeth told contradictory stories. Several were broken, not from decay, but traumatic impact. The upper front incisors showed fractures from blows to the face, yet despite his violent lifestyle and rich diet, the remaining teeth showed relatively little decay. The skull bore the most unsettling injury, a depressed fracture on the left temple, where something heavy and blunt had struck hard enough to crack the outer skull layer. The bone had healed, but the depression remained visible. This injury would have caused unconsciousness and possibly permanent effects. Yet he'd survived, healed, and continued his warrior's life. His height, approximately 6 feet, significantly exceeded the medieval average. This height would have provided advantages in mounted combat, offering greater reach. Combined with pronounced muscle attachment points indicating exceptional strength, the picture emerged of a physically formidable individual. Most healed fractures showed evidence of professional medical care, Medieval Europe had skilled bone setters and surgeons, but their services were expensive. That Sir William's many injuries had been properly cared for suggested access to resources through personal wealth or powerful patronage. Understanding Sir William's life required understanding the strange customs and beliefs that shaped medieval warrior culture. These practices, often bizarre to modernize, made perfect sense within a worldview where the physical and spiritual realms constantly intersected. One of the most peculiar customs involved holy relics, fragments of saints' bones, pieces of the true cross, or other sacred objects believed to possess protective power. Knights frequently wore small reliquaries on chains beneath their armor. Archaeological evidence from Sir William's burial included a small lead capsule that had hung around his neck. Chemical analysis suggested it might have contained organic material, possibly a fragment of cloth or bone considered sacred. The medieval cult of relics represented more than superstition. In a world without antibiotics, where a small wound could lead to fatal infection, people desperately sought any advantage. If carrying a saint's finger bone might tip the scales between survival and death, what warrior wouldn't carry one? Courtly love provided another strange contradiction in knightly culture. Warriors who spent their days in violence were expected to worship ladies with elaborate devotion. A knight might dedicate tournament victories to a noblewoman fighting in her colors. The relationship was usually chaste and formalized, more performance than romance. Yet it served important social functions. Medieval medicine applied to combat injuries often seems horrifying. The use of leeches to balance humors by draining blood was standard practice. Hot irons cauterized wounds to prevent infection, a treatment that worked, though for reasons medieval doctors didn't understand. Trepanation, drilling holes in skulls to relieve pressure, was performed on head injuries. Remarkably, many patients survived these procedures. Heraldry functioned as a complex visual language that identified individuals in combat and proclaimed family history. Sir William's coat of arms would have appeared on his shield, his surcoat, his horse's trappings. The 3 silver chevrons on blue field told those who could read heraldic language that he came from a family of proven service. Feast culture among medieval nobility celebrated excess. A single feast might feature dozens of courses, roasted swans, peacocks served in their feathers, elaborate pastries shaped like castles, gallons of wine and ale. These feasts served political purposes, demonstrating wealth while binding retainers through shared consumption. Tournament culture created its own peculiar traditions. Before a joust, knights might have their armor blessed by priests. Ladies would give favors, scarves or ribbons, that knights wore visibly. Yet beneath this civilized veneer lay genuine violence. Tournament fighting regularly killed participants. The practice of beheading defeated enemies served both practical and symbolic purposes. Practically, it prevented enemies from returning. Symbolically, it demonstrated dominance. But medieval people also believed in restless spirits. Decapitation was thought to prevent the dead from walking, to keep slain enemies from literally rising to seek revenge. Knights were expected to know courtly dances, play musical instruments, compose poetry, and engage in sophisticated conversation when not fighting. This created a strange duality. Men trained from childhood in violence who were also expected to embody refined culture. Sir William would have learned to dance, to play the harp, and to compose verses in French. Sir William de Erghum's life intersected with one of medieval England's most turbulent periods. The 100 Years' War dominated the 14th century, but equally dangerous were the intricate court politics that could elevate a knight to power or destroy him completely. Documentary evidence revealed that Sir William had served in France during the 1350s and 1360s, participating in campaigns that brought England tremendous military success, but also created complex political dynamics. Knights who fought abroad gained wealth through ransom and plunder, but also formed alliances and enmities that transcended national boundaries. The transition from Edward III to Richard II in 1377 created dangerous instability. Knights who'd prospered under Edward found their positions threatened under the new regime. Richard, young and inexperienced, relied on different advisors and favored different military leaders. Established warriors like Sir William faced marginalization. Land disputes were the currency of medieval political conflict. Sir William held estates in Yorkshire and the Welsh Marches, lands granted for military service but vulnerable to legal challenge. A well-connected enemy could initiate legal proceedings that might drag on for years, draining resources and threatening landholdings. One particularly revealing document from 1368 recorded a property dispute between Sir William and another knight regarding estate boundaries. The dispute escalated to accusations of unauthorized fortification, a serious charge suggesting potential rebellion. Whether true or politically motivated, the accusation demonstrated how easily knights could find themselves accused of disloyalty. More damaging were whispered accusations of heresy. The 14th century saw increasing concern about religious orthodoxy. The Lollard movement, questioning church practices, created paranoia about secret unbelief. Knights might be accused of harboring heretical views if they associated with questionable figures. His relationship with the church was complex. He'd been a generous cathedral donor, his burial rites proved that. But cathedral records also showed tensions. A 1370 dispute involved accusations that Sir William had violated sanctuary by pursuing a debtor onto cathedral grounds. Though eventually settled, it suggested Sir William could be ruthless. The final years showed signs of declining fortunes. Documents indicated he'd sold portions of his Yorkshire estates, unusual unless facing financial pressure. He spent more time in Hereford, less at court. His name disappeared from lists of knights summoned for campaigns. These signs suggested either voluntary retirement or forced marginalization. One intriguing mystery involved his family. Sir William had married, records documented a wife named Eleanor, but there was no evidence of surviving children. Medieval knights obsessed over succession. The apparent absence of heirs might explain his generous cathedral donations. His death in 1371 occurred at approximately 51 years old, respectable for a medieval warrior. The cause of death wasn't recorded. He might have died from accumulated combat injuries, from disease, or simply from wear on a body that had endured extraordinary punishment. The elaborate burial suggested he'd maintained sufficient status and resources: the stone cist, the oak coffin, the silk burial shroud. These weren't marks of a disgraced knight. Yet his burial location, while honorable, wasn't inside the cathedral itself. This suggested complicated status, respected enough for cathedral grounds burial, but perhaps not quite honored enough for the premium locations. The mystery of why Sir William's tomb ended up beneath a city street required reconstructing 5 centuries of architectural and religious transformation. The discovery's location wasn't random. It represented the intersection of medieval sacred geography with later historical upheavals that reshaped England's religious landscape. In Sir William's time, the area wasn't merely cathedral grounds, but formed part of a complex religious ecosystem. Hereford hosted multiple religious institutions: the cathedral itself, several parish churches, and a Blackfriars Friary established by Dominican monks. These institutions occupied extensive urban real estate. The Blackfriars Friary, founded in the 13th century, had earned particular prestige. Dominican friars were renowned scholars and preachers. Their friaries attracted burials from wealthy families who believed association with learned, holy men would benefit their souls. Knights favored friary burial. The military orders had close ties to mendicant orders. Archaeological and archival evidence suggested Sir William's burial occurred in what had been the friary's cemetery, or possibly even inside the friary church itself. The stone cist construction matched burial practices in friary churches, where wealthy patrons might be interred beneath the floor. The burial included details reflecting friary traditions. The small lead container might have held ashes or earth from the Holy Land. Friars often brought such relics from pilgrimages. The positioning of hands in prayer corresponded to Dominican burial customs. Even the silk fragments showed colors, white and black, matching Dominican habits. Medieval people believed proximity to holy men aided salvation. Being buried near friars who spent their lives in prayer supposedly created a spiritual environment conducive to the soul's journey. Knights who'd spent their lives in violence sought this association with men who'd spent their lives praying. The dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII in the 1530s devastated these religious landscapes. Royal commissioners arrived at Hereford's religious houses with orders to inventory, confiscate, and demolish. The Blackfriars Friary was closed, its buildings stripped of valuables. Over following decades, the friary's structures were gradually demolished, their stones recycled. This destruction was systematic and thorough. Henry VIII's commissioners specifically targeted burial sites, believing that disrupting medieval burial practices would help break the Catholic Church's hold on popular imagination. Tombs were opened, monuments destroyed, burial grounds plowed or built over. The friars, who might have maintained records of who was buried where, were gone. As Hereford expanded, the former friary grounds were developed. Buildings rose over cemetery land. Streets were laid across what had been sacred spaces. The medieval street plan was replaced by more regular patterns. Broad Street, beneath which Sir William was found, dated to the 18th century and followed a route bearing no relationship to the medieval landscape. This explains why his burial was forgotten. There was no continuous tradition of remembrance, no annual prayers, no family maintaining the tomb. The friary that would have preserved his memory was destroyed. The family line, apparently, died out. The stone cist lay deep enough that later construction passed above it without detection. For 4 centuries, people walked over his grave without knowing anything lay beneath. One detail added poignancy. Chemical analysis revealed salt traces in the soil around the burial. Medieval people sometimes placed salt in graves as a preservative and protective substance. Someone had cared enough to include this expensive material. Yet, despite this care, the burial had been completely forgotten. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's detailed analysis of Sir William's skeleton revealed injuries so extensive that they demanded individual attention. Each scar, each healed fracture told a specific story about medieval combat's brutal reality and the remarkable human capacity to survive despite accumulated damage. The most dramatic injury was the depressed skull fracture. Using modern imaging techniques, Mitchell could reconstruct the original trauma. The weapon, almost certainly a flanged mace, had struck the left temple with tremendous force. The skull's outer layer had fractured and compressed inward, creating a permanent depression approximately 1 inch in diameter. Yet the bone showed clear healing. Sir William had survived weeks and probably months after this injury. Survival required skilled medical care. Someone had to prevent infection, manage swelling, keep him hydrated and fed during recovery. The fact that he lived suggested access to capable physicians, expensive resources available only to those with status and wealth. The long-term effects would have been significant. Modern medical understanding suggests he likely experienced chronic headaches, possibly seizures, maybe vision problems or cognitive changes. That Sir William continued functioning as a knight after this injury testified to either extraordinary resilience or desperate economic necessity, or both. His ribs told stories of repeated blunt force trauma. The pattern of fractures, clustered on the left side at varying heights, matched what would occur during mounted combat, when opponents charged from the right, their lances or weapons striking Sir William's left side as they passed. The collarbone fracture was particularly revealing. This injury typically occurred when a knight was unhorsed violently. Falling from a charging horse while wearing 60 pounds of armor created impact forces that could snap bones. The collarbone's offset healing suggested it had been set, but not perfectly, creating permanent weakness. Both legs bore evidence of lance impacts. The fibula fractures demonstrated that Sir William had participated extensively in jousting. The joust was simultaneously sport and genuine danger. Riders charged each other at combined speeds exceeding 30 miles per hour, wielding 14-foot lances. His hands showed modifications from weapon use. The right hand's metacarpals were slightly enlarged, with pronounced muscle attachments, adaptations from decades of gripping and swinging heavy swords. Medieval longswords weighed 3 to 4 pounds, but wielding them in combat required gripping them intensely, while generating tremendous striking force. The spine's degeneration told its own story. The lower vertebrae showed compression and bone spurring, consistent with bearing heavy loads while moving dynamically. Exactly what occurred when wearing armor while riding and fighting. One particularly interesting finding involved his right knee. The joint showed early osteoarthritis with unusual wear patterns. The specific pattern matched what modern orthopedists see in people who spend extensive time kneeling. Not in prayer, but in the specific crouch cavalry riders adopt when mounting or dismounting armored horses. His teeth's fractures probably resulted from close combat. Medieval warfare included significant hand-to-hand grappling. During grappling, combatants might strike with armored fists, gauntlets, or weapon pommels. A blow to the face could shatter teeth even through protective helmets. Perhaps most remarkably, none of the major injuries showed signs of infection. In an era before antibiotics, infected wounds killed more warriors than initial trauma. That Sir William survived multiple severe injuries without fatal infection suggested either incredible luck or access to unusually skilled medical care. Before Sir William's bones were identified and his story reconstructed, the site had attracted its own folklore. Local legends and reported supernatural phenomena created a layer of myth that archaeology would eventually explain, or at least put into historical context. Construction workers who'd labored on previous projects in the area had long reported strange experiences. Multiple workers across different decades described hearing metallic sounds, clanking, scraping, ringing, when working alone in early morning hours. The sounds seemed to come from beneath the street, muffled but distinct. But some reports were harder to dismiss. In 1987, a night watchman at a nearby construction site reported seeing a tall figure in unusual clothing walking along Broad Street at 3 a.m. The figure appeared solid, not transparent. Only when the figure walked directly through a chain-link fence did the watchman realize he was seeing something inexplicable. Local historians had collected similar accounts spanning decades. A 1923 newspaper article documented a witness who'd seen a medieval soldier near the cathedral grounds. A 1956 police report mentioned a disturbance call about a man dressed as a knight. Officers responded but found no one. The area had acquired a nickname among locals, Knight's Passage, though most people using the term had no idea of its origin. Elderly residents remembered their grandparents mentioning the name, suggesting the tradition stretched back at least a century. More intriguingly, Hereford Cathedral's archives contained a 17th-century document referencing supernatural phenomena in what was then called Friars Street, the road that would later become part of Broad Street. The document, written by a local clergyman, described spectral manifestations of armed men seen near the ruins of the dissolved friary. This detail proved particularly interesting to researchers studying the psychology of supernatural belief. The clergyman's observation that sightings increased during wartime suggested people might project contemporary anxieties onto historical landscapes. Yet the consistency of descriptions, tall armored figures, metallic sounds, suggested something beyond simple projection. After Sir William's discovery, local residents came forward with recent experiences. A woman reported that in 2010, while walking her dog past the site at dawn, the animal had refused to proceed, pulling backward and whining despite no visible threat. She'd experienced an overwhelming feeling of wrongness and retreated. She'd dismissed the incident until reading about the burial discovery. A construction worker revealed that during 2014 preliminary work near the site, his equipment had malfunctioned repeatedly at one specific location, directly above where the burial would be found. Hydraulic systems that functioned perfectly elsewhere would lose pressure at that spot. The worker had joked about the ground being cursed. Skeptics argued these reports represented hindsight bias, people remembering ordinary events as significant only after learning about the burial. Believers countered that the consistency of reports across decades, from people with no knowledge of each other, suggested something genuine. What made these accounts particularly poignant was their timing. If the reports were genuine, if something about the burial site had created perceptible phenomena, then those phenomena had been occurring for centuries while Sir William's identity was forgotten. His presence had been felt, in some sense, even when his name and story were lost. After Sir William's reburial in 2018, reported phenomena ceased. Whether this represented psychological closure or something more mysterious remained debatable. But the timing was suggestive. The night beneath the pavement, properly honored and remembered, apparently rested more easily. Genetic analysis conducted in 2016 provided scientific confirmation of Sir William's ancestry and revealed unexpected details about his lineage. DNA extracted from tooth enamel yielded usable sequences that could be compared against databases of medieval European populations. The process was delicate. Ancient DNA degrades over centuries, and contamination from handling or burial environment could compromise results. But Sir William's sealed stone tomb had protected his remains remarkably well. The Y chromosome haplogroup traced his paternal line to Normandy, confirming family traditions recorded in medieval documents. His ancestors had likely come to England with the Norman conquest in 1066, or shortly thereafter, part of the military elite who transformed England's ruling class. This Norman ancestry was typical for medieval English knights, whose military culture remained deeply French for centuries after the conquest. Even in Sir William's time, over 2 centuries after 1066, the knightly class spoke French, followed French military traditions, and maintained strong cultural connections to the continent. Autosomal DNA revealed more complex mixed British and continental ancestry through his maternal lines. While his father's family was Norman, his mother's ancestry showed genetic markers common in northern England and lowland Scotland, indicating intermarriage between Norman conquerors and Anglo-Saxon or Celtic local nobility. This pattern of Norman fathers marrying into established local elite families was standard practice, creating alliances and legitimizing land claims through connections to pre-conquest noble lines. Physical trait analysis revealed he likely had blue eyes and brown hair that would have been turning gray by his 50s, matching artistic conventions for depicting Norman-descended knights in medieval manuscripts. He carried genetic variants associated with above-average height, confirming what the skeleton showed. More intriguingly, he had markers associated with lactose tolerance, an evolutionary adaptation common in populations with long histories of dairy farming, and genes connected to enhanced bone density, potentially explaining his remarkable survival of so many catastrophic injuries. The analysis also revealed information about disease susceptibilities. He carried genetic variants that would have made him resistant to certain infectious diseases common in medieval Europe, possibly explaining how he survived battlefield wounds that claimed so many others. However, he also carried markers associated with increased cardiovascular disease risk, perhaps contributing to his death in his early 50s. Most poignantly, distant genetic relatives were identified through genetic genealogy databases. Living people carrying Y chromosome sequences or other genetic markers linking them to Sir William across 25 generations. These descendants, scattered across England, Canada, Australia, and the United States, had no previous knowledge of their connection to a medieval knight. Several attended his reburial ceremony in 2018, profoundly moved to honor an ancestor they'd never known existed until DNA revealed the connection spanning 6 centuries. One descendant, a schoolteacher from Yorkshire named Robert Erghum, spoke at the ceremony. "Sir William's blood flows through my veins. His courage lives in all of us who carry his name forward. We owe him not just respect, but remembrance." The genetic evidence permanently established Sir William's identity and family connections, transforming him from anonymous bones to a specific individual whose bloodline continues in the present, whose DNA persists in living descendants who walk the same English soil he defended. The project's final phase involved forensic facial reconstruction, using the skull to recreate Sir William's living appearance. Dr. Emily Foster, a specialist in historical facial reconstruction, built the face in careful layers. First, the musculature, based on attachment points visible on the skull, then fat deposits following age and health indicators. Finally, skin texture, reflecting his outdoor life and accumulated sun damage. The result showed a stern-faced man in his 50s, with deep-set blue eyes that had witnessed countless battles, weathered skin marked by years of exposure to harsh campaign conditions, and broken teeth visible when the mouth opened slightly, a reminder of close-quarters combat. The depressed temple scar remained visible even through reconstructed skin, adding distinctive character. The face that emerged was neither handsome nor ugly, but compelling. The face of a man who'd lived hard and survived against terrible odds. When the reconstruction was unveiled at Hereford Cathedral in June 2018, visitors reported profound emotional responses. Many stood silently before it for long minutes, transfixed. Seeing a face personalized Sir William in ways his skeleton couldn't, he became not an abstract historical figure or academic curiosity, but a specific person, someone who'd loved, fought, suffered, and died like any of us. Children asked if he'd been brave. Adults wondered what he'd thought about in his final moments. The reconstruction bridged 6 centuries, making medieval England feel suddenly immediate and real. The question of what to do with his remains sparked considerable debate among archaeologists, historians, and church officials. Some archaeologists advocated museum display, arguing educational value outweighed other concerns. Others insisted on reburial in consecrated ground, respecting medieval beliefs and modern ethical standards regarding human remains. The cathedral offered a compromise, a spot in the cloister, near but not inside the cathedral itself, respecting his medieval burial's status level, while acknowledging his rediscovery's importance and allowing ongoing research access if needed. On September 15, 2018, Sir William was reburied with full medieval honors, carefully adapted for modern Anglican practice. Historical reenactors wearing authentic reproduction armor formed an honor guard, their polished steel gleaming in autumn sunlight. Latin prayers from 14th century missals were read and then translated into modern English so all could understand. A choir sang plain-song chants that might have been sung at his original funeral. The ceremony drew hundreds of attendees, including newly identified descendants, local historians, the archaeological team who'd discovered him, and curious citizens moved by his story. The memorial stone, carved from the same Herefordshire limestone that had sealed his original tomb, reads, Sir William de Erghum, warrior and defender, buried circa 1371, discovered 2015, returned to rest 2018. His name was forgotten, but his courage remembered. His legacy teaches us that history lies beneath our feet, waiting. That anonymous bones can speak when science gives them voice. That warriors who fought centuries ago can still teach us profound lessons about courage, resilience, duty, and the human capacity to endure extraordinary suffering while maintaining dignity and purpose. The past isn't truly dead. It's never even past. Sometimes it's just sleeping beneath the pavement, waiting for the moment when we're ready to listen to what it has to tell us.